What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show.
And that is interesting you say that, because for me, the greatest sort of true crime book ever written was Wise Guy.
Pileggi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that made that book work was really the story of the wife.
Yep.
Right? And so I met Lewis's wife in Miami and sat down with his kids and had dinner, and
Without him?
he was there.
Oh, he was there.
So his ex-wife, his kids, and we're just having a normal meal. And I'm thinking, I'm having a normal meal with a normal family, but this guy's a fucking big-time cocaine trafficker. This is just fucking weird. But this is what makes it fascinating, that these people can sort of exist among us and you would never know. And eventually sort of Lewis understood that. And so then began this sort of gradual process of sort of convincing his family to get involved with the book. His daughter didn't want to talk to me at all. His sister didn't want to talk to me. She was against the project. You know, there were people in Lewis's family who didn't want anything to do with it. His son was very supportive. He understood that it was a good thing for his father to do. So I had no issues with him, but it really wasn't until the end of the book that it was virtually finished that I even spoke to his daughter for the first time. And
why do you think she finally talked with you?
I guess she probably heard from her mother, from her brother, you know, that Jesse was an okay person to talk to, that you could trust him, you know, and that's a lot of what authors do is you're sort of gaining trust with people. It takes time. It's not it's not something you can just sort of do straight away. So that took years, and by the end of it, the family became a massive part of the story. It's like, you know, I can't even remember how many chapters are in Pure Narco, but it's like sort of 65 or some crazy amount of chapters, right? And a lot of them towards the end of the book are all about the family. It's like, you know, how can you keep a marriage together when you're living like this? When you have to just fucking leave a country at a moment's notice because you're about to get arrested by the federales or whatever. You know, it's like it's crazy. It's a crazy life.
Yeah.
And do you have any guilt and remorse for putting your family through all this shit? Right?
Yeah.
You know, and I Lewis is still a friend of mine to this day. I only heard from him earlier today. Like, we still talk to each other.
Yeah, I feel like he calls you every day. Jesse, I have another story for you, man. No, sit down. You got to hear this one.
No, but he wants to do another book.
Of course he does. I think there's like 10 books in that guy.
And we were talking at one point about doing like a treatment for a TV show. He's got a lot of ideas, which would all be fantastic. It just has to be handled by the right people. And we did have some sort of interest from TV production companies in the book, but that just didn't work out the way we had hoped. And so, Lewis's big hope is obviously that, someone sort of picks up the book and sort of turns it into a TV series, because it's a fucking crazy story. Well, but there's so many ways you could tell it.
Exactly. And to your point that you're making right now, like, if I could see it coming together just like from the outside of how a TV show or, some sort of miniseries or maybe even a movie would come together, it has to be told as the guy who has a wife and kids, and he and his wife have an interesting relationship for various reasons. He can lay out what that is. And then he happens to be a guy in the cartel, not the guys in the cartel, and by the way, he has a wife and kids. Yeah. It has to lead with the thing that people like. That's why people like Tony Soprano too.
Exactly.
Because, here was a guy going through a midlife crisis who was talking to his shrink about it, and his kids were annoying him during puberty, but he happened to be in the mafia.
And that's what we remember from The Sopranos, right?
Stay with the mic if you don't mind.
Sorry, that's what we remember from The Sopranos.
Yeah.
is the relationship that he had with his wife and his kids. And that's the ending of the show. He's with his family, right? It's all about family. So I said to Lewis at the beginning, I said, the family is absolutely critical to us doing this book properly and doing it well. And there's no point us doing it if we can't get that cooperation. So he worked on that, and eventually they came around. But, it wasn't easy.
Yeah. And for people out there who haven't heard the podcasts I did with him, can you just explain what Lewis's role was in the cartel? Because as we said already a couple times, it was quite unique.
Well, he describes himself as a transporter. The guy who, does all the logistics and a guy who, never carried a gun, was never involved in the sort of the horrible side of the business, which was the killing, obviously, and the intimidation. But the guy who would, get the money and go and buy the container ships or buy the planes and organise the pilots and everything else. So, he kind of, I think there's a line in the book where he says, I could have, sort of taken these skills and sort of, started a franchise with these kind of skills. Yes, they're business skills, and he was just very good at it. And as you probably know, he has a certain amount of charm.
Oh yeah,
he has an amount of charm, and he regards himself as a funny guy. And he still berates me for hey, there's not enough humor, or there wasn't enough humor in the book. But hey, Lewis, this is a pretty difficult kind of project for me to pull together. I can't sort of do all these things simultaneously. It has.
We can work that into the movie.
Yeah, but like I said before, there's so many different sort of ways you could go with the telling of this story. You could have a whole film about Operation Journey itself, which was the operation that took him down, and which involved Britain and the United States, and it was a big fucking takedown. Or you could like you said, just sort of concentrate on the family, which would be my preference. But in amongst all that were all these sort of crazy vignettes about life in the cartels, which were sort of stories that you don't really get in Narcos and all those sort of drug themed sort of films. It's very different to Sicario, for instance. It's a completely different story.
Yeah.
And very long. It's like a 600-page book. But when I was finished with it, I mean, we could have done another 600 page.
Sure.
It was he's done so many things, and he's also had a life after the cartels too, which is another interesting story.
Yeah, he did. He ended up doing like 5 years in prison after cutting a deal. There was the whole he in some ways had permission to be able to share with the government on some of these guys. Like they were cool. Some people at least were cool with it. And then the part that I imagine no one's cool with from his old life is that he gets out from prison and ends up doing work with the government. Like he did some undercover stuff for them. Like the way he described it to me that I thought was pretty perfect is he's like, my whole life I'm either on team white or team black. I'm not on team gray. So once I got off team white and, joined team black, that's it. And so, that's what I do. And that kind of goes to the whole amoral thing I was getting at earlier. He just feels like, okay, well, they want me to go do something undercover. I'll do it. Even if that's guys who were in his old life that maybe, he doesn't want to fuck over or something. He's like, well, I play for this team now, so this is our job.
I think really at the end of the day, it's whatever gives him the most adrenaline.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway.
That's how I see Lewis. He's addicted to adrenaline.
Yeah.
And he just takes that attitude into everything that he does. Whether it's his personal life or, his time with the cartels or whatever he's up to today. It's all about having fun. He's like a little kid.
Yeah, that's exactly how I describe him.
And I admire that in some ways. Like I said to you just before the show, like just driving with him in Miami, he just decides to fucking do a U-turn in the middle of nowhere. And it's like, Lewis, what the fuck are you doing? Why not? Like who does that? I would never do it, but he's just got that outlaw mentality and he's just taken it into everything that he does. And that's what's fascinating because he has this outlaw mentality, but he's also trying to adjust to kind of normal life and a normal paycheck. And he's not used to normal paychecks.
No. This is a guy who grew up well as well. It's not like he grew up poor or something like that. Like he grew up well. He went to Georgetown.
Yeah.
And ends up in this world. I think you're on to. I think you're perfectly stated saying he's addicted to adrenaline.
Yeah. And his father was a super rich sort of sugar baron, and so he's been used to a certain lifestyle all his life, and then suddenly, boom, he come out of jail, and I have to, do this kind of manual labor to get by, and he's living in Miami, which is one of the most expensive cities on earth, and I think he struggles with that. So obviously, a big motivation of him wanting to do the book was, selling the movie rights.
Yeah.
Seeing it sort of made into a TV show or a film. And I understand that. And the book was written with that in mind. I wanted it to be as visual as possible. But I also didn't want it just to be a sort of empty, soulless little
That's right.
piece of entertainment, which glorified drug traffickers, because I don't think that's the right thing to do.
And that's also, it's a tough thing to wrestle with because when all these guys, once they get out of prison, I wrestle with it in this job too with some of the people that I end up bringing on here, but they all want to write a book. They all want their book to be made into a movie. They all want to take their old life, if they've fully left it behind, and monetize it, which in some ways I understand that, but it creates, obviously conflicts of interest sometimes with the truth and with what people's motivations may be in doing that and with glorifying everything they did. And that's certainly something that, like, I'm always going back and forth on, like, okay, well, if I had a 15-year-old listening to this episode, I wouldn't want them thinking, like, hey, maybe I should go do this. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.